Now, Rishi Sunak says the government's NHS plan is working. However, the waiting list for routine hospital treatment in England fell for the 5th month in a row. The figure has fallen by almost 200,000 in that period, but Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting has criticised the Prime Minister.
I don't know why Rishi Sunak's doing a victory lap. Waiting lists are higher than they were when he became Prime Minister. He's promised to cut NHS waiting lists. And you also look at the performance standards on things like A&E, ambulance response times. They are shockingly bad to the extent that people can no longer be certain that whether they dial 999 with suspected heart attack or stroke or walk into A&E, that they're going to be seen on time in the right way. So I think by now, hopefully, people have reached a conclusion that the longer the Conservatives are in power, the longer patients will wait.
Well, Wes Streeting wasn't having it, and I'm joined in the studio now by Health Minister for the Conservative Party, Maria Caulfield. Welcome to the show. So some good news for you. The numbers down for 5 months on the bounce, but Rishi Sunak had said earlier in the day he believed NHS waiting times were his biggest failure as Prime Minister. But this is good news today, is it?
It's really good news because it's not just the number of people on the waiting list are falling, but the length of time they're waiting for procedures. So compared to, I know you had the Labour Shadow Secretary on there, but in Wales, there's 40% longer waits for procedures in Wales where Labour run the health service there. But people are waiting just under a year now for many procedures, and we've opened up a number of avenues to get those waiting lists down from our community diagnostic centres. We've got over 160 sites now performing things like CTs, MRIs, endoscopies, which have helped get down those waiting lists. We've opened up over 100 surgical hubs across the country, which are, again, operating to get the back of that backlog down. We would be further ahead if we hadn't had the strikes. For example, I think in February there was 34,000 procedures that would have been done if it wasn't for the strikes, that would have brought those lists even lower. So considering we've just come through winter, considering the strikes that were ongoing, it is good news, and patients will be seeing the difference in terms of who else is on the waiting list and how long they have to wait.
And yet we have seen scenes yesterday in London, a South London GP, there were queues around the block, people queuing for hours, struggling to get an appointment. We saw similar scenes in Bristol, people queuing over 3 days to try and join a new GP there. People say to us all the time they struggle to get hold of a GP. They've gone missing in action, many people believe, and even getting a routine dental appointment. So there's still lots and lots of work to do.
There is. I mean, we did close down the kind of routine healthcare system for nearly 2 years under COVID, and of course that creates a natural backlog in itself. But if you look at dentistry, for example, since we put our new dental recovery plan in place in January, we've seen 500 new practices come and join NHS dentistry, and we'll create 2.5 million more dental appointments. We don't employ dentists direct, so we do need them to take up NHS contracts, and we're trying to make that more attractive for them. So there's good news all round, whether it's A&E waiting times, the 4-hour waits are improved, the 12-hour waits are improved, dentistry appointments are becoming more reliable, and the waiting lists are coming down too. So, you know, overall, it's positive news in terms of the direction of travel. OK, talking about toothache, Boris Johnson has been having a bit of a pop at Rishi Sunak. He was in Canada having a go about smoking and the forthcoming expected vote. Is there any coincidence, do you believe, that Boris is saying this is a very unconservative thing to do? It's not what Winston Churchill would have done, of course, referring to him as the world's most famous cigar smoker. And a rebellion is expected next week. Is this Boris still leading as the leader from over the water, the king over the water? Is that helpful? Well, I mean, it will be a free vote, and Rishi said that from the start when he announced it at a party conference last year. We're not stopping anyone from smoking. Obviously, we want people to stop smoking, but the legislation that's been brought in, anyone who smokes now will not be forced to stop. What we're doing is for children who are the next generation will not be able to legally buy cigarettes. So people who choose to smoke now, despite all the warnings, despite all the concerns, will not have that freedom taken away from them. And it is a free vote for a reason. You know, there's never been a whipped vote on smoking legislation, even under when Labour were in government. And so, it's interesting to see how Boris would have voted if he was still in Westminster. But that is for each individual MP to make a decision on. The polling suggests it's very, very popular with the public because people know that the dangers and the harms that smoking can cause. We know it's a leading risk factor in cancer, in heart disease, in stroke. Even from a dental point of view, it's a leading factor why people lose their teeth if they smoke because their gums recede. So smoking is, something that we need to eradicate, and the legislation will mean that the next generation will no longer be able to legally buy cigarettes.
Can I ask you, Wes Streeting has been very outspoken about how he says the NHS needs reform. It needs a mixture of private and public money to lessen the burden on the working classes. Nigel Farage has said a similar thing over the years. Have the Labour Party stolen a march on you here? Isn't that the sort of reform that the Conservative Party should have been cracking on with these past few years? Well,
we've absolutely been doing that. That's how part of the way we've got down our waiting list has been by using the independent sector. So each local area will be doing it through their NHS trust, but where the independent sector in their local area has capacity, they'll be using that as well. Some of our community diagnostic centres that we've opened up, doing the CTs, MRIs, X-ray scans, some of them are being done with independent providers providing those. Dentists are independent providers, as are GPs, and they take on NHS contracts. So the work between the NHS and the independent sector has been going on for decades, and actually that's a key reason why we've got many of our waiting lists down.
Do you think that the conversation around reform of the NHS is just long overdue? It's almost become like a church, something which just cannot be criticised, but despite the fact waiting times are slightly down, people still often are fearful of being critical of it because it is this ideology, but it is far from perfect, and is the solution to keep pouring endless billions into a bucket that seems to leak?
No, we've been very clear about that. It's not just about how much you spend, but it's what you spend it on. That's why our money, instead of when Labour in government and they frittered away millions on an IT system that never saw the light of day, we're putting it into surgical hubs, we're putting it into dentists, we're putting it into community diagnostic centres, so that people actually see the difference this money is making. It's why I got into politics. I was a nurse and I was fed up of working under the Labour government when they were in charge of the NHS, because by no means did they have any solutions then. And I'm not hearing much from Wes that we're not doing already, to be honest. OK, I want to quickly ask you again about Boris Johnson. A lot of people that watch GB News, they quite miss him. Do you think Rishi Sunak has got what it takes going into the next election? We keep hearing about growing numbers of letters going in, maybe a leadership challenge on the cards. Well, when I'm door knocking, I'm knocking on a lot of doors at the moment. The one thing that people say to me is they're fed up with infighting within the Conservatives. They want us to get on and deal with things like the NHS and getting waiting lists down. They're not interested in personalities and who said what to who. Boris, I was a big supporter of Boris myself. He could have stood for leadership. Do you miss him? Of course. I think, Boris was a larger-than-life character. He could have stood in that leadership election the last time he withdrew. He could have fought the by-election when the recall was triggered. He chose not to. He chose to resign. So he made some of those decisions for himself. But absolutely, I think Boris has a huge amount to add. And people on the doorstep do miss him, but they want us to get on and start delivering for the country. And the figures out today prove that we're doing just that.